And hello, everybody, and welcome to this first Wade presentation on this track. My only regret is that we aren't all in person. Wouldn't it be nice right now to be at the Sleeping Lady and being able to see each other in person? That would be terrific. What I'm going to talk about is just start off this track with a broad overview of where things are at the state level in terms of the food system and food policy, and what activities are happening at that level around food policy. And then I want to talk about what are some of the opportunities for conservation districts to engage, and just sort of, pardon the pun, whet your appetite a little bit here with what some conservation districts are doing. We have other presentations lined up for this track over the next several days that are really fascinating, coming from folks at conservation districts that are already doing an outstanding job in the food system and on food policy. But what I'm going to do this morning is just kind of give you an overview so that you have the context for it. Before I jump into the presentation, a little background on the issue. Back in 2000 and from 2001 to 2004, I was Natural Resources Advisor to then Governor Gary Locke, and agriculture was one of my issue areas. And in 2004, after talking to many stakeholders, I crafted a proposed executive order for the governor to create a food policy council. And there's only about 3 months left in his administration, and he said he didn't want to create something in the last few months of his administration. So after that, I spent the next 7 years trying to convince the Gregoire administration to create a food policy council, and had no success. Then we had the recession came along, and the governor was leery of creating new structures and new entities. But later she did create the Food Policy Roundtable, which was composed of those involved in the food sector, primarily around the food and hunger community. I shorthand, I call them foodies, not meant to be an insult, but just a good shorthand. It included agriculture did not participate, and it included several state agencies. And those conversations went on for probably close to 2 years. And the process was bumpy, and the results did not look good. The state agencies had many concerns about some of the recommendations and how they were crafted. And it got to such a point where the state agencies actually walked from the Food Policy Roundtable process. So in an effort to do better, proponents went to the legislature and in 2014 started a conversation around creating some sort of a food council or food system and food system coordination approach. So legislation was run, legislation didn't pass, but then they did make some progress through a proviso, which I'm going to get into more depth right now. But I just wanted to give you that background that this issue has been around for a long time. And people have been talking about it, and so structure has finally been established and things are moving forward. And I think there's a real positive future for the role of conservation districts in the food system that I think will really enhance your work in engaging with landowners and plugging them into the food system. So today I want to cover what a food system is, what are some of the elements of the food system for district engagement, what's the Food Policy Forum, and what are we working on at the Food Policy Forum, what are some examples of work of conservation districts in the food system, and a discussion about next steps for the Commission and conservation districts on food policy work. So what is a food system? Well, when we talk about the food system, it covers a whole broad spectrum of food and production and transport and marketing and selling and consuming, but also waste. It's a cycle, as you see in this diagram, of the system, and it covers every aspect of it. And each aspect of it, just take food production, which we're most familiar with. You can imagine some of the specific details as we burrow into that topic about food production and the places we could go there, and where we could go in terms of food processing and issues around marketing and markets, and so forth. And an interesting thing is conservation districts are engaging in every aspect of this food system. So when we talk about the food system, this is what we're talking about. When I mention food policy, what we're talking about are the policies, the system of whether they're laws or agency rules or actions by non-governmental organizations, actions by conservation district to implement elements of the food system. So that's what we mean by food policy. And this is what we mean by the system. And there are a lot of elements of the food system, as you probably recognize just in looking at that diagram and thinking about your work, that are applicable to the work of conservation districts. Food production is the obvious one. Food processing, think of that as a value added. So it's not just the big processors that are processing potatoes into French fries or grapes into wine. Food processing can also be smaller scale value added for medium and small scale farmers so that they can add value to their crops that they're producing. Food distribution, many conservation districts are involved in those, and a popular approach are called food hubs. And those are places where food can be aggregated or brought together in one location, making it convenient for small to mid-sized farmers to bring the food together to one location where it's distributed or even sold. Markets and purchasing, many districts are involved in web-based farm links. I think you'll be hearing about some of those in other presentations, but those are really popular with conservation districts, and districts are ideally situated to engage with farmers, to link farms into the different markets. And with many farmers, they're not aware of what markets are available and what markets can do for them. And so I think districts are ideally situated to engage with farmers to make them aware of what's possible in marketing outside of just your friends and family, and marketing to cities and other consumers, especially online. Preparation and consumption for some conservation districts, as I'll mention here in a minute, are involved in providing technical assistance for preservation of food. Especially with the pandemic, there was an increased interest in preserving food and either homegrown food or purchasing in bulk and preserving and storing in bulk. At the Food Policy Forum, one of the things that we're discovering is, many schools, when there was the budget crunch from 2008 on, and school funding was reduced, one of the first programs they cut was home economics. And so many kids today and a lot of adults don't know how to prepare food. So we could give them 20 pounds of potatoes when there's a food shortage like there was during the pandemic, and we could give them 20 pounds of potatoes, but they'll look at the potato and say, okay, how do I turn this into a French fry, or how do I even turn it to a baked potato? A lot of people don't know how to prepare fresh foods and locally grown foods. So that's another area that we're looking at. And waste recovery, I know there are several conservation districts that are involved in composting. There's an exciting project, I think it was Stevens Conservation District is involved in with some school kids that created a composting program at their local school. It was really exciting. Also keep in mind, one of the things that we didn't see in that food system diagram, that one of the aspects of the food system that we're also talking about when we talk about food policy and food is this is a farmland preservation issue ultimately. What we're trying to do is keep farmers economically viable. Because as I've always said, if a farmer can keep making money growing lettuce, then they'll keep growing lettuce until they no longer make money. So what we need to do is help them continue to make money doing what they do, growing what they grow, whatever that product is, and help them make money doing that on the farm. Otherwise, they'll be tempted to sell the farm to the highest bidder, which will usually be development, which is an increasing pressure right now due to housing shortages and the excuse me, the quest for affordable housing. So one of the things that we like to talk about with people around farmland preservation is there's a lot of ways to do farmland preservation. There are easements and things like that. But a fundamental aspect of farmland preservation is to keep farmers farming and help them be productive and profitable as farmers. And so that's what we're trying to do is with our involvement in the food system. So I'm going to shift now to the State Food Policy Forum. And as I mentioned, the forum was originally created through a budget proviso in 2016. There was some legislation that had been crafted and a lot of conversation around it. For a variety of reasons, originally the legislation didn't pass. And so legislative supporters shifted and had the forum created through a budget proviso. And it's continued by budget proviso through the 2019 and 2021 biennia. So the current biennia that we're in for the next few weeks, the Food Policy Forum is being implemented along the lines of the proviso. But in the 2020 session last year, the bill finally passed and legislation was signed into law establishing the Food Policy Forum as part of the Commission statute. So that would be Title 8950. If you want to take a look at that in the statutes, if you're one of those like me that love reading the statutes every night, you can take a look at that. But it is established in statute, which is good news. Also good news this year, in the budget for the next biennia, the legislature fully funded the forum at $340,000 for the biennia. That would help support continued facilitation and staffing of the forum. The facilitator that we've had, Ross and Associates, they've been just outstanding in helping us keep the pace moving forward, because this is a lot of work, and they've just been incredibly helpful in pulling the Food Policy Forum together and maintaining progress on that. So the forum, in both the statutory language really mirrors the proviso. So basically what happens in the legislature oftentimes is if you can't get a bill passed, they just take the bill language and they put it in your budget with some funding and call it a budget proviso, but it's really the same language that was in the bill. So basically the Food Policy Forum is charged with making meaningful recommendations for improving the food system in Washington. And the forum is co-convened by the Commission, our partners at the Department of Agriculture, and the Office of Farmland Preservation, which is a program within the Conservation Commission and headed up by Kate Delavan. So these three entities, we coordinate every week on the Food Policy Forum and the work of the forum, and help maintain momentum and keeping the forum moving forward. The forum has convened a cross-sector group of food system stakeholders to consider and develop recommendations that have broad support from the forum's diverse members. And I want to talk about the membership for a moment. Remember I mentioned the Food Policy Roundtable and how agencies ended up walking, the agricultural community was not involved. And that had to do because of kind of the composition and the way issues were brought up. There were some issues that were considered controversial in terms of how to discuss them and advance them. And what we wanted to do in the Food Policy Forum is create a place where we could start off with a primary goal of building trust among the diverse entities. And I'm really pleased that I think we have been able to do that. In our membership, we have folks representing the food and hunger communities. We have folks representing the food banks and that part of the food system, those who are working hard to get food to children in schools, to get food to the poor and those who need it through the existing systems at food banks and other food distribution systems. But we also have the agriculture sector involved, which we did not have at the roundtable. And agriculture commodity groups have been very active, the potatoes, the Hort Association, the Dairy Fed. We've just had some interest expressed from the cattlemen wanting to be involved. The Farm Bureau is involved, very involved. And so it's been really good to have the agricultural engagement. And some of the early ground rules that we had, one of them was that the work of the forum and the issues that we would take up, whatever the issues were, one of the fundamental things was that we would not tell farmers how to farm, because farmers were very concerned about getting into issues such as, are they going to force everyone to go organic, or are we going to take up issues like you've seen in California about caging animals or how husbandry is done. Those kinds of issues make the agricultural community very nervous. And they didn't want to have those issues there. And again, what we wanted to do is continue to build trust. And we have the state agencies participating, not just the Commission and Department of Ag, but we also have DSHS and staff there that work in food system and food programs, WIC and the other SNAP and the other programs that help folks get access to food. They're involved. We have staff from Department of Health. We have staff from OSPI who are involved in plugging in with schools. So it's a great group. And the way that we've set up our meetings from the beginning is we started out with what I called a 101, 201, 301 approach. Those who have been to college know what I'm referring to when I use those numbers. But what we did was each issue that members brought up they wanted to discuss, we held what we called a 101 session around the issue. And that was so that everyone could get oriented around the issue, because there were some issues that were important to a particular segment that others didn't know about. So, for example, out of the agencies and the hunger community, issues around EBT cards, the cards that folks are issued for SNAP and other food assistance programs, and how they have access to different locations and so forth, and the bumps in that. That was a big issue. But the folks on the commodity side, the potato and the hort, and those folks didn't have a lot of awareness of what those issues were. So we held 101 sessions to help educate. Same thing on the other side. Potato growers, for example, had a number of issues in production and transport that they would like addressed. Folks on the hunger community side had no idea. And so the 101 sessions were, okay, here's the basic groundwork. The 201 sessions then were to take that conversation to the next level and say, what are the issues around this particular topic? Why is it a sticking point? What are the pros? What are the cons? And so you start to get into more detailed discussion of those policy issues. And then in the 301 stage, that's when we develop the recommendations. The 301 stage is, okay, here are the recommendations, and everybody's familiar enough with the subject matter that it helps that engagement. And then in the process, we're building trust. We're building trust between these communities that had a lot of trust had been broken in the previous process, and in the way some of these issues had been approached. So I think we've really built on that trust, and the result of that has been a series of reports with recommendations that we've been able to develop. In June of 2019, we developed a set of recommendations as required in our budget proviso, and then we were asked when COVID hit, the governor's office approached in August and said, or in early 2020, and said, we'd like you to evaluate your recommendations in the context of COVID and what are the impacts of the pandemic. And that turned into our report that we issued in August of last year. And then the governor's office, just as we were submitting the report, literally just a few weeks before the report was due, said, we would like you, the governor's office said, we would like you to apply an equity lens to the recommendations to determine how equity is influenced or impacted by the recommendations. And so that's one of the things we've been focusing on for the past year with our new report and work plan that was just submitted to the governor's office for review and approval, and then it'll go on to the legislature. So again, in June of 2019, we developed a report with recommendations to the legislature on the food system and improvements in the food system. In June of 2020, we had a second report that was due, and the governor's office asked us to take a look after March and the shutdown, wanted us to evaluate the recommendations in light of the impact of COVID, which was very fascinating to see how COVID and the pandemic shutdown had impacted the food system and how people were able to get food. And then, as I mentioned, again, in our work plan, they asked us to incorporate an equity lens on our recommendations as part of the report, which we've done. So again, the governor in March asked us to apply the equity lens. So what does that mean? How do we apply the equity lens? As Tom mentioned in his comments, if you were at the main session, the equity is a huge issue in our state, and rightly so. It's an issue that many folks in many sectors of our society are looking at now. And for our book of business, there's a lot of questions being asked about broadly equity in agriculture. The Department of Agriculture has a budget proviso, yet another proviso that was based on a bill that didn't pass, where Department of Agriculture has been asked to evaluate the equity of agriculture or equity of farming and what that looks like in the state. And in the proviso, it does mention they'll consult with the Conservation Commission as they do that analysis. But all agencies are being asked to take a look at their work and apply an equity lens, and the forum is no exception. And so we sat down and we thought about, okay, how do we do this? What is the equity lens? What does it mean to apply it to your programs? And what we did was we brought in some experts from the state's Office of Equity, as well as the State Department of Health, where they've applied equity lens to their programs. And so they gave us some really good ideas, and we formed a subcommittee to take a look at the equity lens. And so what we did was we developed some key questions that would be applied to the recommendations in the early action report that I mentioned that came out in the fall of 2020. And we convened a subcommittee to plan an Equity 101 meeting, which we did, again, following that same concept of the 101, 201 process. And again, we had a 101 meeting with all the forum members to talk about what do we mean by equity lens? What do we mean when we talk about equity within the food system? And so we hosted that meeting in December of 2020, and it was a really good meeting and a really good conversation about equity within the food system. And the subcommittee reviewed and refined a draft equity filter that the forum tested in the spring of this year. And I wanted to share this with you because I think you might find this interesting in how we are pursuing the equity lens and applying it. And what we're doing is applying these questions, basic questions, to each of the recommendations. And so the forum is divided into 4 teams, and the recommendations are divided, and you'll see this in a moment. The recommendations are divided among the 4 teams. And what we're going to be doing is asking each team to take a look at what recommendations are ready to be advanced and applying these equity questions as a, quote, equity lens to them. And I think they're kind of fascinating questions. The first is, how has COVID exacerbated racial or ethnic disparities in the elements of the food system identified in the report? Another question, how are individuals and families who are facing economic insecurity in the food system impacted by COVID? In what ways might the actions of the report be employed to reduce inequities based on racial, ethnic, or economic disparity? And I wanted to highlight this, that the conversation around inequity and the entities we're applying it to, another term that's used are historically underrepresented communities. And the historically underrepresented communities are those who I'm sure you could make a list of who they are, include not only racial communities and ethnic communities, but it also includes economic disparity, areas where poverty is particularly significant and long-lasting, and what are the impacts there. You'll also find it in your conservation district work in rural communities where you have a lot of people living on limited income, and economic opportunities are not the same as they are in urban settings. And so economic disparity will exist and affects the food system and our thinking about how we're distributing food. And then we're asking the forum members to think about what perspectives the forum needs to engage with to inform an equity approach, to implement the actions contained in this report. And what that means is, what perspectives do we need to engage? Who do we need to engage? And what are the key elements? Obviously, those who represent historically underrepresented communities. But one of them that's kind of fascinating in my mind are bringing in those who are customers of the many programs, those who are using the EBT cards, those who are taking advantage of food banks, or even those who are leery to take advantage of food banks, because there are those. And understanding from them what would make it easier, what would make the system work better for them, and asking those questions. And all of these answers to these questions will inform and help us modify our recommendations, or will help guide the implementation of the recommendations and how we do them. So that's where we're headed at the forum. And so many of you know that this year we had some extra funds from the funding for the current biennia that the legislature had given us. And in those extra funds, we decided to do a series of offer small grants to conservation districts to help support work that conservation districts are doing on food policy and food system issues. And we had 50,000, and we issued 10 grants. We were able to offer 10 small grants. And just a quick overview, just so that you have a sense of what different CDs that receive funding we're working on. So at Thurston, they're increasing markets for producers, connecting consumers and buyers with producers, and they'll do that by working through a food hub. I mentioned the food hub earlier, and they're also update their online buyers directory and the farmer's basket with the 2021 season information from producers. I've talked to a farmer in Thurston who grows, is a cattleman and sells beef, and he said he's now booked over a year in advance for his beef, and is trying to line up as many processing units as he can to process those into USDA cuts. But there's just a tremendous increase in folks accessing those kinds of directories. And so Thurston CD has been very active in trying to link the farmers. And they're also hosting workshop partnership with Bounty for Families and WSU Extension on how to harvest and cook. Again, this is the how do you produce and consume the food. Lewis CD, addressing our needs for the historically underrepresented communities by translating the district website and farmer applications into Spanish to assist those landowners with the online platform. And something we've talked about at the forum with many of these experts that are engaged at the forum is, okay, it's great you can create these platforms, but if they're not in the language the user understands, or if the users simply don't know how to use the platform, it's not an effective tool. So they need to be trained in how to do that. So Lewis was looking to engage on that. Underwood CD is partnering with the Gorge Farmer Cooperative to expand farmer participation and distribution within the towns. Some people think, oh, there's small towns, everybody has a garden, but that's not always the case. And so some of these things that they'll be doing at Underwood, including facilitating connections between farmers and the cooperative through the website, again, making those linkages. Here's a unique one you may not have thought about, but a refrigerated trailer to be purchased to use as a mobile pickup site. So that's another big problem that we found with the pandemic was available storage, especially cool storage for products to make them available. And then they're engaging on the SNAP and EBT benefit cards and machines. And what this is to make it available at smaller farmers markets and so forth, so that people can use the EBT card at markets to get fresh produce. At Spokane CD, they're looking to strengthen the existing Spokane Valley Farm Corridor network that they've created with a farm finding map, again, linking consumers to the farmers. And the funding we provided will help district employees update the web content and help build the website for the farm corridor. And it's the second of 4 farm corridors that this Spokane CD plans to create in their county. Ferry CD, their funding they're going to use to update and redistribute the Northeast Washington Farm to Table Buying Guide, again, connecting the farmers to the consumer and distributing those in the local newspapers. And there's outreach and to identify new lists and supporting operations of the current guide. So they want to get new farmers engaged. Over in Pacific Conservation District, they're going to set up distribution of farm fresh produce through partnership with the Southwest Washington Food Hub. Again, a district getting involved, working in the food hub type of system for food distribution for local access to foods. And again, that helps not only the local consumers get the food, but it also helps local farmers by getting more money for them. Stevens County CD is working with Ferry CD and the WSU Extension where they provided canning safety and education workshops to serve both counties. They're also engaging with the Spokane tribe and the Colville Confederated tribes for canning workshops and engaging with those entities. So that kind of outreach is terrific and engaging with a broad set of folks within the community. Snohomish CD is working with Forterra and the stakeholder group to develop a food system plan for Snohomish County. And one of the roles that the district will have in this is to focus on providing resources for low-income communities and communities of color, which is excellent. And a component will also will be that the stakeholder group has identified a significant need to improve communications, especially around supporting local farms, serving those in need. So they will lead development of a communications hub that will be accessible on the website and create web pages and graphics for the hub, as well as populate it with information about local food and other resources. So again, the district serving a role as a place to connect the grower with those in need. And Kitsap CD, who I saw will be coming up, I think is next, or after lunch anyway, has an outstanding program, the GRACE program, and funding will be used to help increase food access for members of their community for locally grown foods and connecting with food banks and technical assistance to farmers. And they've donated over 20,000 pounds of fresh vegetables annually. The funding that we provided will also support their efforts around the Kitsap Farm to Food Pantry program, Kitsap Farm to Freezer project, and Pantry on the Go. Kitsap just has a wonderful program, and you'll be hearing about that in their presentation later today. Woodby CD is working with WSU Extension to engage with local farmers and the Whidbey Island Growers Association by offering farm walk events and creating and distributing 3-minute videos to highlight the events. And then again, communicating opportunities to connect farmers and opportunities that farmers have to connect into e-commerce tools. And then Mason CD, this is a fascinating one, is developing a gleaning program serving Mason County and the city of Shelton. In particular, they're looking to address food insecurity by connecting local farmers and gardeners with local food banks. That's another thing is, gardeners, as you know, if you're all gardeners yourself, love to garden and grow food, and oftentimes you grow more than you can eat, especially if you plant more than one plant of zucchini or more than 2 tomato plants. So what do you do with all of that? Well, Mason CD program for gleaning will help to connect that extra produce into the food bank and get it to folks in need. And they'll be addressing low-income communities there at Mason CD. So what's next for our work on food policy? For the Food Policy Forum, we've divided into 4 challenge areas. The first one is support for ag and food enterprises. And so we're looking at areas like identify and provide economic relief and stimulus in the near term to the needs of ag sector and enterprise types, offer growers and agricultural enterprises market cultivation assistance and business support services, provide cost share small grants to help farms and food system businesses shoulder the cost of pivoting to new markets and meeting increased demand for locals. That was something we saw in COVID was there was a shift to local by the consumer, but a lot of farmers were not prepared for that shift. And so they need resources and technical assistance to be able to continue that shift. The second area is around a flexible food system. And this gets at the public health responses and recognizing and supporting farmers markets as essential components, opportunities to improve the food system infrastructure. That was another thing we saw in COVID, that the food system infrastructure, there were a lot of needs, particularly around storage for food banks and so forth. And I think the most recent budget from the legislature really helped with that, and providing resources for some farm food banks to be able to add warehousing and other infrastructure. And increase purchases of Washington farm products through better visibility and promotion, and implement a set of land protection tools to mitigate potential loss of ag land and promote exchange of ag land to new and beginning farmers. And we're engaged in that right now through Kate and the Office of Farmland Preservation is engaging with other key stakeholders in what we call Farm Pie, which is a program working with the State Housing Commission to try to create low interest loan opportunities for farmers, new and beginning farmers. Whoops, wrong direction. Challenge number 3 around healthy food access. This is to ensure expansive and comprehensive nutrition services and assistance reach those in need, support growers and people in need by purchasing food from Washington growers, including small and mid-scale farms. So there was a real desire to emphasize the small and mid-scale farms, those who many of you work with, and how do we get them into some of these opportunities. And support growers and people in need by helping use their benefits to buy fresh and local products. That's how do you use the, it's the underword approach of looking at EBT cards and having an EBT machine so that you could use those at farmers markets so that they could purchase local fresh food with their EBT card rather than just have to go to a grocery store. And finally, resilience and climate change. We acknowledged that climate change is going to have a big impact on how we grow food and produce food, and will change the food. And so we want to support implementation of programs that provide immediate financial assistance to farmers to encourage them to go towards more resilient farming. One of the key programs here is the Sustainable Farms and Fields program that Allison in our office is working very hard with other stakeholders at Audubon and the Nature Conservancy and American Farmland Trust, and some strong support from the legislature. We're looking to get federal funding for that program now to help support farmers be more resilient in the climate change world that we're facing and how they grow their food. So I just want to, that's my presentation, and I wanted to open it now. I wish we were in person. It would be fun to really have an engaging conversation, but I'll look to Linda and the other facilitators to help. Like to kind of open it up with what are other ideas or opportunities for CD work that you may be underway at your conservation district or have ideas for. And also, I would like to float the idea and see what folks here might think of. I'm thinking of coordinating and pulling together a statewide conservation district food caucus that could meet maybe monthly on a call to help coordinate conservation district work, share ideas, and look for opportunities, policy opportunities, to where we could advance the work of conservation districts in the food system and the work that you're doing. I think that better connection will help districts see different opportunities, learn from some work that other districts are doing at Snohomish and Kitsap and Spokane, and just all around the state. There's just wonderful work that's happening, but I'm not sure that we're all aware of it. So I wanted to float the notion and float the idea and see what your response is to creating a conservation district food caucus. So with that, I don't know, Linda, and others, if there are questions in chat, I'll open it up.
Terrific.
And see.
Thank you, Ron. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much. I think Kelsey is going to moderate questions. And so Kelsey, go ahead and take it away. But Ron, that was excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so as a reminder to all the audience, feel free to insert your question in the questions box. You can also do it directly in the chat box, as long as you make sure to specify it's to us. Stephanie and I are kind of moderating that. And also you can raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can verbally ask your question in the attendees box. So that's another option as well. And I see, let's see here. I've got
Ron, can you go back a slide so we can have those questions up for people?
Sure.
Oh, I see a question.
I think everybody knows how to reach me. I'm not hidden.
There you go.
So I do see a question. The question is, it looks like a two-part question. Is there an expected follow-up round of small food system grants? And the second part, it seems that those really, oh, it's not a question. It just seems like those really engage CD's abilities to engage in this field. So the question being, is there an expected follow-up to those?
Right now, we're just starting to craft the budget for the next biennia. As I mentioned, it was $340,000. The budget bill divided that up, $170,000 each year. So we're trying to sort out how much do we need for facilitation. As you know, trying to coordinate something like this is pretty intense. And so we need to think about how much facilitation time, how much staff time. I would really like to see if we can do this in a way where we can offer another round of grants. I can't promise that it'll be at the 50,000 level, but I'm a big fan of those kinds of grants for conservation districts. I think those really help advance your work and really help you engage. And I'm a big fan of those, big fan of those. So I'm going to do what I can as we develop our budget to try to create that opportunity again. So stay tuned. Maybe we can get word out about that through a caucus.
And I do see a couple of folks having made comments saying yes to a food caucus. Yes, please create a statewide food caucus. So a lot of support for that.
Good to hear.
Another question that came in when you were sharing there, someone had asked, I know that the Puget Sound districts have a food group. Do other regions around the state have similar ones?
Not that I'm aware of. That's why I'm kind of floating the notion of a statewide. The Puget Sound, it's unique in that the Puget Sound districts are operating in a regional area that has a series of regional structures around a variety of issues. And food is one area where there are different regional structures. And I think that sometimes what happens is we forget, or the rest of the state can get excluded. And that's not anything intentional on the part of the Puget Sound districts. They're trying to do the best they can to be responsive within the arena in which they work, which is Puget Sound. And connecting within that, and food is part of the Puget Sound Partnership Action Agenda. And there are also a lot of opportunities that we're seeing in the Puget Sound, and I think we saw it with the grant that went to Ferry CD and the work that they're doing. There's opportunities to partner with tribes. There was quite a conversation recently that salmon recovery is a food security issue, and approaching it in that way. And so there's a lot of opportunity to do that. So I would envision the Puget Sound Food Caucus continuing, but I also think that there's a great opportunity to expand that statewide so that we can get a variety of perspectives from conservation districts and what's needed for to help through work.
Yeah, great.
Perfect. I just want to add to that. I helped to co-lead that group for Puget Sound, and we've only had a couple of meetings. It's not anything we've done a lot of work with. It's just starting some communications, and I would love it if it was statewide. I think that's a really great idea, Ron. So thanks for asking that question.
A question came in, are there aspects of the food system diagram that districts need to be careful with? Can we get ourselves into trouble if we engage in certain aspects of that food system diagram?
I think the one thing to really keep in mind is the sensitivity that farmers and the agricultural community have with, again, the shorthand that we use for that is don't tell me how to farm. And our advantage there is conservation districts are experts in how to engage with farmers, to tell them how to farm in a polite way. We know how to talk to farmers. But what they really mean by that is don't say, you don't go in and say, hey, you've done conventional farming, you really need to change. Or, you really need to get out of this or that. I mean, being that kind of directiveness, that is, I would caution about doing that, but I also know that that's just not your training. That's what this week is about with Wade. That's what CTD is about. And I know that that's what you're all about and how to engage with landowners, but that's one of the sensitivities there. There are certain issues that are hot button issues, including things like minimum wage for agriculture. Farm worker issues are real hot button issues. Those are a couple of the issues that caused the roundtable to collapse. Environmental issues, of pushing too hard on an environmental perspective, and trying to force or require farmers. And again, our advantage in our niche is incentive based. As Allison is working with her sustainable farms and fields, that's all incentive based. So anything that's directive. And besides, how it is in talking to farmers. I remember talking to my grandpa one time, and that was when free range chickens were becoming a thing. And he asked me, what's a free range chicken? So I explained it to him. Well, here's what a free range chicken is, Grandpa. And when I got done, he said, oh, so basically it's a chicken that got out. Yeah, well, yeah, pretty much. That's what it is.
Awesome, thank you. A few more questions. Is there any work happening with food distribution through public transportation networks, to your knowledge?
That's an interesting question. Not to my knowledge, but I think that might be something worth exploring. I'd have to go back and look to see if it was part of any of the recommendations, but if the asker could just feel free to email me with more info and we could plug that into the dialogue, or we could bring it up also at our when we have our statewide meeting. But that's a real interesting question.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see, when does partnership add to the results or duplicate efforts? What if other groups are active in that sector?
That's a really good question, because there are a number of groups active on it. Before I came to work for the Conservation Commission, as Linda knows, because she and I both worked at the Puget Sound Action Team and later with the Puget Sound Partnership. And I always say, when you're working in Puget Sound, anything worth doing is worth creating a new entity for. And that sometimes happens in the food world, that people will create things. I think as you engage on this issue, it's good to do kind of a survey of the local area and see who's doing what, and look for places that are your niche. And if you see your niche and there's a gap, then there's an opportunity for you. If you have your niche engaging with farmers and others may be engaged in that, those are opportunities for partnership. We saw a lot of partnerships, as you saw with the grants with WSU Extension. So there are others. Tribes are another great opportunity for partnership. And then with some of the state agencies, how they're putting out, like DSHS or Department of Health and OSPI at the schools, how they're putting it out. So I think I would approach it from what's your district interested in doing and working on? Then the next step is, what's the landscape in my local community look like? Who do I need to go to either reach out to who's already there, or if there's a gap, nobody's there, do I go out alone, or do I bring in others for partnership? But I think you'll hear some of the presentations this week in this section talking about how they've developed some terrific partnerships.
Great. This looks like it's a multi-part question. First of all, they thank you so much for your presentation. In the presentation, you talked a bit about the farmland conservation and preservation aspect as an important part of enhancing our food system and a way to keep farmland in production. Can you talk a bit about how conservation districts can interact, or maybe have historically interacted, with local and statewide land trusts that focus on farmland preservation? And is there an opportunity there for CDs and land trusts to collaborate to help inform food policy and meet the farmers' needs?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. And we unfortunately only have a few minutes left, and we could go a long time and yet another reason we need, I think, a statewide caucus. There are various districts around the state that work very closely with their land trusts on food issues. I think Okanagan is one. Jefferson CD just had a question the other day from there, that they're working together with the land trust on acquisition of a farm. So Thurston CD works very closely. And I'm gonna, this is like the Oscars. When you get an Oscar and you thank people, you're gonna leave somebody out. So I apologize if I leave anybody out, but a lot of districts are working with their local land trust. On the east side, there is an issue. It may not be an issue anymore, but I remember at one time there was an issue it was sort of a land trust desert in terms of land trusts that are focusing on specifically on farmland conservation as opposed to broader ecosystem conservation. So again, what I find is, particularly in Eastern Washington or places where folks are a little bit more reluctant and dismissive of government, I have found in conversations that talking about farmland preservation as a toolbox of things, and particularly focusing on looking for opportunities to increase the value that farmers can get for their product, as a great way to open the door for landowners to then talk about everything in the toolbox, from access to different markets to farmland preservation and conservation easements that give value to the farm today, to water conservation, to other things, because you're not coming in saying we want your land. You're coming in and saying we want to help you be successful on your land, and here are some ways to do that. And I tell you, I've been in conversations in Okanagan and in Whitman that we've just been able to turn the whole conversation around from people coming in tense and ready to introduce me to their Winchester to having a real open dialogue. And I think approaching it in that way can really be successful for districts.
Yeah.
And of course, districts, you guys know how to do that very well.
Yeah, well, and this particular question, as an anecdote for my district, we have a great working relationship with our would-be Camino Land Trust, and many a time we've had, you know, farms that are exploring that conservation easement status with the land trust reach out to me who potentially have had historically a farm plan done. So we get to re-update that farm plan, kind of tie those two pieces together in a nice synchronous way to help keep that farmer's ag land in production. It looks like we've just got a couple minutes left and a couple questions left. The last, second to last question is, are there any funds available to explore local options? And that was from Alan. Let's see, I'm wondering, Alan, and maybe you can write in there and expand, but if that was in reference to your first question. So when partnership maybe results or duplicates efforts. Maybe Alan, if you wanted to message in the chat, are there funds available to explore local options? Maybe you can clarify that, or Ron, you can kind of interpret that in the context of his first question.
Yeah, I think, Alan, that again, right now it would only be through grants, but I think the more that we can describe the story, you know, we could work with Laura in our office and other great communications folks to develop some great communications about the work that conservation districts are doing. This is a topic that I would just love to go to the legislature and say, here's an opportunity for funding in our conservation districts, and here's the need. Districts are just chomping at the bit with some great programs to be successful, and I think that we get organized. I think we could really tell that story.
Great. And last question before we head over to lunch for the next hour. Will there be training opportunities to assist conservation districts in engaging with BIPOC and LGBTQA communities in the food systems work, since there are special considerations in supporting their efforts?
That is a great question. I really like that question, a good one to end on. And I think that would be a terrific one for this caucus to take a stab at and work with, because the questioner is absolutely right. And you know, there's a lot of opportunities that I'm not even aware of. I wasn't aware, and folks at King CD are aware, but I wasn't aware that there's a Somali women's farmer organization in South King County. A lot of us aren't aware of some of these different entities. And let's not forget the lower income communities that are out there as well. So I think that would be a terrific question that we could take to one of the first caucus meetings and set up some trainings. There's some people that could help us how we could identify BIPOC communities and historically underrepresented communities, and develop a strategy to do outreach specifically for those communities. I think that would be terrific work that we could do.
Great. Well, that looks like all of the questions that I can see from here. If folks do have questions that come up during lunch, feel free to put that in the chat. And Ron, I'm not sure if you'll be joining us later on in the afternoon, but we're happy to have folks, you know, chat some answers in the chat back. So great. Yeah. Thank you, Ron, so much for your time and resources.
Thank you, Kelsey and Linda and Stephanie. Thank you very much.
And as a reminder to everyone, we're just about to go on to lunch for the next hour. So be back here promptly at 1 o'clock if you aim to stick in the food systems track. We're going to be hearing from Diane Fish from Kitsap on that Kitsap Grace project. So don't miss it. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Ron. That was great.
Thank you.